When the Trump administration announced a 25% tariff on vehicles and auto parts from Canada and Mexico, it sent shockwaves through the American automotive industry. And it looks like no one felt more heat than GM and its CEO, Mary Barra, who is now forced to make bold moves, one that will either save or ruin the company. Raising costs, global competition, and internal challenges, tariffs are just another layer of GM troubles. GM's CEO's shocking reaction to Trump's tariffs clearly says that the stakes are high. So let's take a closer look at what's exactly going on behind the scenes at GM right now. Mitigating new tariffs. Besides the critics and all the drama about tariffs and how they are about to devastate the American automotive industry, General Motors CEO Mary Barra has also been quite rational with the recent statements, announcing actual plans on how to deal with the inevitable. The idea is to reduce the impact of potential tariffs, and according to Barra, GM has the capacity to offset 30 to 50% of those costs in the short term, without needing to make major investments. On the other hand, the company's chief financial officer, Paul Jacobson, stated that if tariffs remain there for a long time, then the company would have to adjust production and parts supply chain to minimize the effect. What's interesting is that these remarks came right after concerns about tariffs caused GM's stock to drop 8%. As you can see, Barra has taken a pretty rational stance, unlike her colleagues like Jim Farley, who criticized the proposed tariffs, calling them disruptive and costly for the industry, pointing out that long-term tariffs would seriously damage the whole U.S. automotive sector. He also talked about aluminum and steel, suggesting that even a small increase in costs can add up and hurt the company's bottom line. All in all, both companies have been assessing how these trade policies will affect their business, each in its own way. According to Barra, GM sources most of aluminum and steel from the U.S. and has secured fixed pricing. But still, she also confirmed that they are not even close to finishing the evaluation of the long-term effects of tariffs on these materials. So what we can all conclude is that, no matter the different approaches of officials, the result is the same. Tariffs bring uncertainty. GM's CEO met Trump despite tariff fight. The last couple of months have been extremely tense due to the new administration plan to impose new tariffs on products from Canada and Mexico, which would significantly increase production costs of major automakers. Various officials from different automakers, including GM, have been extremely loud, pointing out that the new tariff won't increase American production, but do quite the opposite, putting American automakers in danger. And that day finally came. President Donald Trump met General Motors CEO Mary Barra recently to talk about GM's plans to invest amid his tariff war. Trump and his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, stated that the idea is to move more assembly and production parts to the United States. A few days before, the American president agreed to exempt automakers for months from his 25% tariffs, and the recent discussion came after a telephone call with Barra, Farley, and Elkan. During the meeting, Barra said to President Trump that GM plans to invest $60 billion, but she hasn't specified the period over which any of the spending would occur. The main problem, according to Barra, is that they need some kind of guarantee about policies on tariffs, as well as vehicle emissions, before they make any significant investment in the U.S. But we haven't heard much about what happened next. All the official said was that GM shares President Trump's goals of a strong and competitive American manufacturing base and economy, but no one was willing to share any particular details, which seems quite indicative. In the meantime, Trump imposed new tariffs on steel and aluminum, which affect nearly $150 billion worth of products from the metals, ranging from cars to bulldozer blades. All prior exemptions, exclusions, and quotas expired. According to the American Automotive Policy Council, which represents the Detroit 3 automakers, domestic manufacturers buy most of their steel and aluminum in the United States. But the problem is that tariffs could raise the cost of their suppliers. Experts say tariffs will severely impact profit. Trump's plan to impose 25% tariffs on vehicles and auto parts imported from Canada and Mexico will have tons of negative effects, experts say. According to them, these tariffs will impact GM's profit, since the company assembles a lot in these neighboring countries, particularly Mexico. The problem with America's major automaker is that its profit margins are already very small, and since most experts suggest that, on average, these tariffs could raise the cost per vehicle to around $3,000, it's clear that there won't be much left for the company in terms of profit. And with increased costs, GM and other companies could easily end up being discouraged from investing in American manufacturing, as was initially planned. GM's position in all this is not particularly great. There are American automakers, particularly EV companies like Tesla and Rivian, that produce exclusively in the United States. Even foreign companies like Honda keep most of their production in the US, traditionally earning the title of some of the most American-made cars on the market. On the other hand, experts highlight that automakers like GM are at the highest risk, because GM relies heavily on production in Canada and Mexico. That's not exactly in accordance with how GM rings in our ears, because there aren't many things that sound more American than General Motors. But those glorious GM times ended long ago, and over the last couple of decades, the company has been struggling to keep pace with ever-growing competition, especially one that's coming from Japan and Korea. For decades, GM has been forced to work out different strategies for cost-cutting, and, of course, outsourcing was one of them. Back in 1994, when the North American Free Trade Agreement went into effect, GM expanded its Mexican production significantly. It was hard to resist significantly lower labor costs, so today, the company produces more than 750,000 vehicles south of the border every year. And the problem isn't just in numbers. It's also in the fact that some of the company's highest reputable models, which are also some of the biggest profit generators, are produced in Mexico. Locations are numerous, starting from that Silao plant that produces bestsellers Silverado and Sierra. The Coahuila plant, on the other hand, assembles a couple of popular crossovers, Chevy Blazer and Equinox. Besides vehicles, GM produces tons of parts for its vehicles in Mexico. The Toluca plant, for example, has been operational for 6 decades. Besides Mexico, GM also has several ongoing operations in Canada, which will affect the cost once tariffs hit. The Oshawa plant has been there for decades and still produces pickups like Silverado at full capacity. The Cami plant is still active as well, though oriented to commercial programs. Finally, let's not neglect the fact that GM produces thousands of engines and transmissions in the St. Catharines plant. Relocation plans. With everything we've just said, it's pretty clear that GM won't be able to mitigate enough tariffs if they remain in effect permanently. So it's no surprise that the key strategy that GM officials have been working out lately is the one that's all about moving these plants back to the US. That's right, relocation is the word you're looking for. The only one that can save GM and its prices from skyrocketing. And since complete relocation won't be possible, the other part of the strategy is to increase the production capacity of existing assemblies. The good thing is that GM's production is dispersed, so this process won't be too exhausting. For example, full-size trucks are produced not just in Mexico, but in Canada and domestic US factories as well. So it's clear that the production capacity for the most important models can be increased relatively easily, at least to some point. That's much better than starting from the ground up like some of the rivals will have to do, considering that they moved pretty much the entire production of certain models to Mexico or Canada. But even at this, an easier kind of dealing with tariffs won't be cheap. As we already mentioned, GM plans to invest $60 billion, and there's no doubt that a huge portion of that money will go on relocation and capacity increase. Will this sum be enough, and how fast can this process be completed? That's also the question, considering that GM has been stretched thin for a while, particularly by its super ambitious electrification program, let alone massive operations in China. Hard times are coming for GM, and it will take more than luck to deal with all these challenges simultaneously and come to the point where once again we can talk about decent profitability. It's a big bite, but GM has no other option but to take it. For now, GM officials have measured the challenge, and they believe that they can offset up to half of these costs in the short term. But no one knows what's about to happen in the long run. Adjustments to production and supply chains are necessary, and all this comes after the company's significant drop in stock price. These are uncertain times, and it looks like GM is one wrong move away from passing a critical point. Will it make it? Considering this tremendous pressure, it is left to be seen. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.